Imagine a world lit not by swords, but by ideas. A world where deserts became capitals of knowledge, merchants became explorers, and scholars rewrote the very language of science. This is the story of 1,000 years that reshaped the Earth, and still shapes us today. If you love history, make sure to like, subscribe, and share, and write in the comments where you're watching from. When the early Islamic world emerged, it didn't just build cities, it built a vision. From the Arabian Peninsula, a message of unity, justice, and discipline began to spread. Tribes that once fought endlessly now stood together under a single belief that power meant responsibility, learning, and humility before God. Within decades, the map of the world began to change. Mecca and Medina became centers not only of worship, but of leadership. As Islam expanded toward Persia, North Africa, and the Byzantine frontiers, something remarkable happened. Instead of destroying cultures, the new civilization absorbed them. Greek philosophy, Persian administration, Roman engineering, all were studied, improved, translated, and preserved. Baghdad rose like a miracle from the banks of the Tigris. Founded by the Abbasid caliphs, it became the beating heart of the world. The House of Wisdom stood like a lighthouse in the dark. Scholars translated works from Greek, Sanskrit, Syriac, Persian, saving knowledge that Europe had forgotten. Mathematics turned into algebra. Navigation became precise. Medicine became systematic. Paper replaced parchment, libraries multiplied, and ideas traveled faster than armies ever could. Merchants carried spices and astronomy. Poets carried verses and philosophy. Faith fueled curiosity, not fear. Knowledge became worship. But this golden rise was not only intellectual. Cities flourished with gardens, hospitals, and public bathhouses. Farmers learned to irrigate deserts. Architects raised mosques whose domes still echo like distant thunder when you stand beneath them. From Cordoba in Spain to Samarkand in Central Asia, the Islamic world connected continents with trade and tolerance. Yes, there were wars, rivalries, and politics. Humans are never perfect. But compared to the chaos of the age, these societies built bridges, literally and spiritually, that allowed cultures to talk to one another. And slowly, the world changed. Europe would one day awaken from its long sleep, fueled in part by the knowledge preserved, expanded, and returned by Muslim scholars. The compass, the astrolabe, algebra, mechanical clocks, hospitals, surgical techniques, all shaped the foundations of the future. This was more than expansion. It was a civilizational project, to build, to refine, to learn, and to leave something behind. Yet this story is not only about glory. It is also about challenges, fragmentation, power struggles, and the heavy weight of success. Because every civilization that rises must face what comes next. And our journey has only just begun. What happens when knowledge becomes power, and power becomes destiny? The Islamic world was no longer rising, it was ruling. But the higher a civilization climbs, the stronger the winds that try to break it. Remember, if you enjoy this documentary, like, subscribe, and share, and write in the comments where you're watching from. By the 9th and 10th centuries, the Islamic world stretched across continents, from the burning sands of Arabia to the snow-covered peaks of the Caucasus, from North Africa's shimmering coasts to the green plains of India. A vast network connected humanity. Different dynasties ruled different lands, the Abbasids in Baghdad, the Fatimids in Cairo, the Umayyads in Andalusia. They disagreed, competed, and sometimes fought. But despite political rivalry, one thing united them: a shared obsession with knowledge, innovation, and governance. Scholars like Al-Khwarizmi reshaped mathematics. Ibn Sina rewrote the rules of medicine. Al-Biruni measured the size of the earth with astonishing accuracy. Philosophers debated time, destiny, ethics, and reason. Universities flourished. Al-Azhar in Cairo, Al-Qarawiyyin in Morocco, and learning centers from Bukhara to Nishapur. Students traveled thousands of miles just to sit in front of a great teacher. But alongside brilliance, new tensions grew. Power became more complex. Wealth concentrated in the hands of elites. Rulers built magnificent palaces, while peasants worked harder than ever. And far beyond the borders of Muslim lands, enemies were watching. In Europe, kings and popes studied the strength of the Islamic world with fear and jealousy. The Crusades began not only as religious wars, but also as political campaigns to reclaim prestige, trade routes, and influence. When the Crusaders marched toward Jerusalem, their brutality shocked the world. Cities burned, populations were massacred. For decades, blood and faith collided across battlefields. Yet from this chaos emerged leaders who symbolized discipline, mercy, and strategy, figures like Salahuddin Ayyubi. Unlike many conquerors of his time, he treated captured enemies with dignity. Even Western chroniclers who fought against him wrote of his character with respect. But the Islamic world was not threatened from the West alone. In the East, clouds gathered, darker than anything the world had seen. A new power was forming in the steppes of Central Asia, ruthless, organized, relentless, and the Mongols. Their armies moved like storms, erasing cities from maps, leaving behind smoking ruins and empty silence. While scholars built libraries, generals argued, while rulers competed, the world around them changed. And sometimes history punishes civilizations not for being weak, but for being divided. Still, amid tension and danger, people continued their daily lives. Traders traveled, teachers taught, scientists experimented, calligraphers painted verses with beauty that still takes your breath away. Because civilizations are not only shaped by kings and wars, they are shaped by ordinary people who wake up every day and decide to keep building. The first cracks had appeared, but the foundation still stood strong. What happens next will test everything: strength, unity, faith, and endurance. The 1,000-year journey is approaching its storms. Sometimes history doesn't whisper, it screams. And when it screamed at the Islamic world, the echoes carried fire, steel, and destruction. If you're enjoying this documentary, like, subscribe, and share, and write in the comments where you're watching from. By the 12th and 13th centuries, the Islamic world stood at the crossroads of destiny. Trade routes glittered with wealth. Mosques and universities touched the sky. But beneath the surface, rivalries deepened. Sultans and emirs competed. Caliphs argued over legitimacy. Armies fought each other for land and pride. And when a civilization is divided, it becomes vulnerable. The Crusades continued to rage intermittently. Some cities were lost, some were regained, and diplomacy mixed with war. But the real nightmare approached from the east. The Mongols did not come to negotiate, they came to erase. Their commanders moved like thunder, disciplined and terrifying. Whole populations were uprooted, enslaved, or destroyed. Cities that once glowed with knowledge, like Bukhara, Samarkand, and Nishapur, were reduced to rubble. And then, they reached Baghdad. Baghdad, the jewel of the world. Baghdad, the city of poets, doctors, architects, and philosophers. Baghdad, whose libraries were said to hold more knowledge than entire kingdoms. In 1258, the city fell. For days, the Tigris River reportedly ran black with ink from destroyed manuscripts and red with blood. Scholars were executed, hospitals burned. The House of Wisdom vanished forever. For many, it felt like the world had ended. But history is complicated. The Mongols, brutal as they were, eventually converted to Islam in many regions and became part of the same civilization they once destroyed. New dynasties emerged from chaos: the Ottomans in Anatolia, the Mamluks in Egypt, and regional powers that tried to rebuild. Yet something had changed. The psychological shock of losing Baghdad broke confidence. Trade routes shifted. Local rulers became cautious, defensive, and sometimes authoritarian. While Europe slowly transformed, entering the Renaissance and later the Age of Exploration, many parts of the Islamic world focused on survival instead of expansion and innovation. Still, the spark was not gone. Scholars continued to write. Architects continued to build breathtaking mosques. Poets described loss, faith, and hope in words that still inspire millions. And in cities like Cairo, Fez, Istanbul, and Isfahan, culture blossomed again. More disciplined, more spiritual, and deeply aware of the fragility of power. The 1,000-year journey was now filled with scars. But scars do not mean defeat, they mean survival. The Islamic world had faced storms that could have ended it forever, yet it endured. However, the next chapters would bring new forces: gunpowder, empires, colonization, and the slow clash with a rapidly modernizing West. The story is far from over. From the ashes of destruction, new powers rose, armed not just with faith, but with fire. The world was changing, and the Islamic world had to change with it, or be left behind. If you're enjoying this journey, like, subscribe, and share, and write in the comments where you're watching from. The collapse of Baghdad did not end Islamic civilization, it transformed it. In the centuries that followed, 3 mighty empires emerged, reshaping politics from Eastern Europe to India. The Ottoman Empire, the Safavid Empire, the Mughal Empire. Together, they became known as the Gunpowder Empires, mastering cannons, muskets, and new military strategies. Their rise showed that Islamic civilization was still creative, capable, and ambitious. The Ottomans captured Constantinople in 1453, turning it into Istanbul, a city where mosques crowned the skyline and cultures intertwined. They controlled crucial trade routes, built sophisticated legal systems, and created architectural wonders like the Suleymaniye Mosque. The Safavids in Persia forged a strong centralized state, shaping art, philosophy, and identity. Their cities glittered with blue-tiled mosques and bustling bazaars. Meanwhile, in India, the Mughals blended Persian culture with local traditions. They built magnificent palaces and monuments, including the legendary Taj Mahal, a symbol of love, empire, and artistic genius. But history never stops moving. Beyond the oceans, something unexpected was happening. Europe discovered new trade routes to the Americas and around Africa. Wealth poured into European capitals. Their ships carried gunpowder, goods, and, most importantly, ideas. Science accelerated. Printing presses multiplied books. Exploration turned into colonization, and slowly a new imbalance emerged. While the Islamic empires remained powerful, many of their leaders underestimated the pace of global change. Bureaucracies grew rigid, innovation slowed. The world outside was transforming faster than many inside realized. Some reformers tried to push modernization, military training, new schools, translations of Western science, but resistance came from tradition, politics, and fear. Meanwhile, European powers advanced with industrial strength, naval dominance, and aggressive economic ambitions. They didn't only want trade anymore, they wanted control. In North Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia, pressure increased. Diplomats negotiated, armies confronted one another. Treaties were signed, some fair, many not. Yet during this period, Muslim scholars, poets, and thinkers asked deep questions. Why had the balance shifted? What was lost, what must be preserved, and what must evolve? The arts continued to flourish. Miniature painting, calligraphy, religious scholarship, and spiritual philosophy. Sufis traveled, preaching peace and inner reform. Teachers encouraged learning, not despair. But the modern world was arriving like a storm, and storms rarely ask for permission. As the centuries turned, the gunpowder empires began to weaken. Not because they lacked courage, but because history demands adaptation. And adaptation always comes at a price. The 1,000-year journey was reaching a turning point, one that would redefine borders, identities, and the very meaning of power. Ahead lay colonialism, resistance, awakening, and the long struggle to reclaim dignity in a fast-changing world. Every civilization faces a moment when the world changes faster than it can breathe. For the Islamic world, that moment arrived with iron ships, foreign flags, and a new kind of empire. If you're enjoying this documentary, like, subscribe, and share, and write in the comments where you're watching from. By the 18th and 19th centuries, the map was being redrawn, not by kings on horseback, but by industrial powers armed with factories, steam engines, and global ambition. Europe no longer looked at the Muslim world as a rival, it saw it as territory. Colonial empires stretched out like shadows. Britain, France, Russia, later Italy, Holland, and others each sought ports, resources, trade routes, and influence. Some regions fell through warfare, others through treaties, loans, and deception. Borders were carved with rulers across deserts and mountains, dividing tribes, communities, and even centuries-old trade networks. Local rulers were often left powerless, reduced to symbols, while real authority shifted to colonial administrators. And yet, this period was not simply defeat, it was a test. Muslim thinkers, scholars, and reformers began asking urgent questions. How did the world change so quickly? Where had we fallen behind? And how could dignity be reclaimed without losing identity? Figures from Egypt to India, from North Africa to Central Asia, tried to reinterpret tradition alongside modern science. New schools opened, newspapers emerged, political movements formed. Some argued for revival through faith and moral reform. Others believed in technology, constitutions, and education. Many believed both were necessary. But colonization left deep scars. Economies were reorganized to benefit foreign capitals. Languages, histories, and cultures were often suppressed. And resistance, whether peaceful or armed, was met with prisons and punishment. Still, people resisted. In Algeria, Libya, Egypt, Sudan, India, Central Asia, movements rose and fell. but the desire for self-rule never died. Mosques became meeting places, poetry became protest, and history became a weapon of memory. The 20th century finally brought change. World wars weakened colonial powers. New nations emerged: Egypt, Pakistan, Indonesia, Morocco, Jordan, Syria, and many more across the Middle East, Africa, and Asia. Flags were raised, national anthems were sung. Hope returned, but independence came with heavy challenges. New states had to build governments, economies, armies, schools, and identities almost from scratch, often while carrying the divisions that colonial borders had created. Global politics, capitalism, communism, the Cold War pulled countries in different directions. Oil wealth transformed some regions overnight, bringing skyscrapers and highways, but also inequality and dependence. Elsewhere, poverty, corruption, coups, and conflicts slowed progress. And yet, amid struggles, something powerful happened: a cultural and intellectual awakening. Universities expanded. Scholars re-examined Islamic history with fresh eyes. Artists, filmmakers, and writers explored identity, memory, exile, and hope. Millions traveled, worked, and studied abroad, connecting the Islamic world more deeply to the global stage. Science, medicine, and technology revitalized slowly. Communities built charities, humanitarian organizations, and institutions of learning. The Islamic world was no longer an empire. It had become a mosaic. Dozens of nations, hundreds of cultures, one shared historical memory. But the story is not finished. Because history is not a museum, it is a living river. The next and final chapter looks at today: crisis and creativity, conflict and rebuilding, fear and faith, and how a 1,000-year legacy still shapes the future. The past is never truly gone. It breathes through our cities, our languages, our dreams, and the story of the Islamic world, across 1,000 years, is still being written today. If you're enjoying this documentary, like, subscribe, and share, and write in the comments where you're watching from. Today, when we look across the Islamic world, from Morocco's Atlantic coast to Indonesia's islands, from Central Asia to the heart of the Middle East, we see contrasts that tell a complex story. Skyscrapers rise beside ancient mosques. Oil rigs stand near deserts where caravans once crossed. Universities and tech hubs exist alongside refugee camps and war zones. This is not a civilization that disappeared. It is a civilization still negotiating its place in the modern age. The legacy of the past remains everywhere: algebra in classrooms, hospitals saved by medical traditions born centuries ago, navigation, astronomy, architecture, and philosophy, all shaped by scholars who believed seeking knowledge was an act of faith. But alongside pride, there is pain. Conflicts, sectarian tensions, and political struggles continue. Outside powers still influence the region. Economic challenges and social divisions raise questions about justice, freedom, and dignity. And yet the future is not only written by government, it is written by people. Young scientists, engineers, filmmakers, teachers, and entrepreneurs are emerging. Women and men alike are reclaiming education, leadership, and creativity. New universities collaborate with the world. Digital technologies connect communities across borders. In classrooms across the Islamic world, children open books, dream of careers, and imagine futures that are bigger than conflict. The great question remains: what can be learned from the last 1,000 years? Perhaps this: civilizations fall when they stop questioning. They weaken when they divide. They rise when they learn, adapt, and act with justice. The Islamic world story is not one of perfection, it is one of resilience. A civilization that built libraries when others were burning them, that welcomed scholars from different faiths, that made mistakes, faced invasions, endured colonialism, and still stands. Today, a new chapter is being written, one not defined only by war or politics, but by culture, science, faith, and human dignity. The past whispers a message: build, learn, question, create, and leave the world better than you found it. Because the true legacy of the Islamic world is not in palaces or empires, it is in ideas that continue to inspire. And as long as those ideas live, the 1,000-year journey never truly ends.